Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and welcome to another episode of Catalogs, Manifests, and Metadata. Oh my. And I just got back from attending the Apache Community Over Code Conference. So this is the annual sort of open source get together from the Apache Software Foundation. And it was a great time. The way they did it this year is they usually have like a North American Apache Community Over Code, formerly known as ApacheCon, and a European one. So they had one in Bratislava earlier in the year. But this was a unique experience. It was my first ApacheCon Community Over Code. I was a speaker there. I got to speak on versioning of the Lakehouse. So basically talking about things like Nessie, LakeFS, Apache Iceberg, and that was a good time. I must say, like Apache Iceberg definitely was the darling of the conference. Every time I attended an Apache Iceberg talk, it was basically standing room only. You had every seat filled and people standing in the back. Okay, so a lot of interest. So it was a really good time. So a lot of talks I kind of heard was there was like again my talk talking about versioning. There's a talk from Apache board member uh, and developer at Dremio, JB Onofre, talking about he had a couple talks. One talking about Carafe, which was a project that he worked on, which is really cool. Basically, what it does, it kind of like allows you to kind of create different runtimes for your Java applications, and then you can use something like Camel, which is another Apache project, to send messages between those applications. And it was just kind of talking about just sort of taking advantage of those features. It was cool. Definitely allowing me to learn more about many of the different Apache projects being at this conference. But also, he did a talk on Polaris. So, one of the big things going on in the Iceberg world is the idea that now that sort of many people, like basically, if you take a look at what's going on in Apache Iceberg, you have every day some announcement from some new tool that's adding Iceberg support. So probably the biggest announcement most recently was at the DBT Coalesce conference, DBT announcing Iceberg support. Now, what does Iceberg support in DBT look like? I'm unsure, because typically the reading and writing of Iceberg is really engine specific. Like you could already use DBT to read and write Iceberg tables using an engine like Dremio. Your DBT models would then just leverage Dremio's engines, and the output would be Iceberg tables. So I'm not quite sure what it is, but again, the point is that it just adds to sort of the state of things where basically everyone wants to make some sort of Iceberg related announcements. I'm aware of other Iceberg related announcements that you'll hear later in the month, but no spoilers. Just make sure you stay tuned, because it's such an exciting time. The idea of real high performance big data that doesn't require quite as much of the work as we've had in the past. The amount of data duplication, basically getting rid of a lot of the problems of the past. Now, again, the ecosystem is still maturing, and that's kind of where I was trying to get at, where basically now that sort of people are moving in the direction of Iceberg, they're realizing, hey, we need some way to bring these tables from tool to tool, to govern these tables, and this is where sort of the catalog conversation is coming in. And you sort of have different catalogs sort of vying for that spot of sort of like the catalog. So you have like Polaris, Nessie, Gravitino. Polaris and Gravitino have both applied to be Apache projects, so they're both now incubating projects at Apache. They both kind of take a different approach. So Polaris is really sort of like Iceberg as a first-class citizen type catalog, and essentially it's built for Iceberg, with Iceberg in mind, specifically allowing you to sort of track all your tables, which is generally what an Iceberg catalog does, but with a couple really nice things. Probably the main thing that people are going to want right off the bat is its RBAC. So RBAC stands for Role-Based Access Control. So the idea here is in the current paradigm of Polaris, the way basically access control works is that there's catalog roles and principal roles. So the idea is that a catalog role, which basically to put that in the context, a really other nice feature of Polaris is you can have multiple catalogs. So it's not just one catalog, it's a service that manages several different catalogs. And I'll come back to that in a second. But each catalog can have multiple catalog roles. And those catalog roles dictate what someone with that catalog role can do with the tables in that catalog. Okay, can they read, can they write, can they access the metadata, whatnot. And then a principal is a user, and a principal can have a principal role. And a principal can have many different catalog roles. So basically, how a individual user can interact with a particular catalog depends on the catalog roles that were assigned to it. Okay, and that's just sort of its existing model. There's talks about taking that model and extending it to individual objects, so that way you can apply those kind of rules to individual tables and individual views and namespaces. There's also talk about creating, like, making the RBAC system pluggable, so that way you could have different versions of it that you could use depending on sort of how you want to deploy your Polaris instance. Again, very, very early days, really a lot of really cool stuff sort of coming down the pipeline there. But not only is there the security aspect, and the beauty of that is because before really people really thought about handling access control at the catalog level, access control had to either be done by, like, saying, hey, you can't access these files unless you have the right storage credentials, or two, at the engine level. So you can go into, let's say an engine like Dremio, create a rule saying that you can't access this table or that table. But then if you were to access that table with something like Spark, then you wouldn't, basically what would happen is those access rules would be out the window because it's a different engine. Now, Dremio already did this with its Dremio catalog. So in Dremio Cloud, you have a integrated catalog that you can already kind of put some level of access controls on, and those access controls are adhered to when you access that catalog from other tools. So that kind of already existed, but basically it was built into the Dremio platform. And that's, again, when I mentioned there's cool announcements coming up by the end of the month, that's going to be a particular space to kind of keep an eye out. So keep an eye out on that. But the idea is that now you have this sort of open source security set. Like, you had Nessie before, and Nessie had some security features, but now you have something that sort of like makes that first class, and it's going to be an Apache project. So it's a community run project. Okay, so the other thing that Polaris kind of adds to the mix is the idea of external versus internal catalogs. So you can create as many catalogs within your Polaris instance as you want, but you can also connect other catalogs. So, for example, I mentioned Nessie and Gravitino. Since these are both catalogs that support the REST catalog interface, basically they can actually connect to Polaris. So if you do have a Gravitino instance, you have a Nessie instance that you might use for different reasons because each of them have different value propositions. You can connect them to Polaris, and then from a read-only perspective for your end users, they can just basically use Polaris to connect and allow any engine to discover your entire world of Iceberg tables, even if they're across multiple internal and external catalogs, and be able to have those RBAC rules applied, giving them access to read those tables. Right now, for external catalogs, you can only read, not write. That's another discussion as far as the future of being able to create like a federated catalog feature. So that way you can connect an external catalog to Polaris and still be able to read and write to it. Because the issue there becomes syncing the metadata. I mean, essentially, if you kind of solve that problem, that has some sort of interesting implications for how you handle a lot of things, which is pretty cool. Cool. So that's sort of what Polaris does. But then there's also Gravitino. Now, Gravitino is not less Iceberg specific, more than trying to be a catalog of all the things. So you can catalog your Hive tables, you can catalog your Iceberg tables, but you can also catalog things like ML models, schemas for like streaming purposes, because again, there's things called schema registries that are oftentimes used for streaming, so that way you can kind of keep track of what schema the data in the stream is within, or to kind of help enforce schemas on data being streamed into a system. So essentially the idea is that it's supposed to provide sort of all this metadata of different types in one catalog, and then also allow you to be able to deploy that catalog across multiple geographies, so that we can have that catalog accessible at the nearest region possible, yet all of it kind of keeps in sync and whatnot. Now, exactly how it mechanically does all that, I'm still not 100% familiar with all the nuts and bolts, but that's the idea there. So point is, there's an exciting time in the world of catalogs. This is sort of the big discussion now. Okay, and you have open source options, open source community run options that are coming to the forefront to see what this sort of next evolution, this next stage of sort of maturing the Lakehouse ecosystem is going to look like. And you're starting to see like a lot of companies trying to build offerings around these open source catalog options. Okay, and yeah, that's kind of like were some of the main things that I kind of walked away with coming out of Apache Community Over Code, because definitely, like, we also I've been helping organize a series of events called the open source data. Usually we do talks. They're called open source data deep dives, and this is all part of sort of like the grander Apache Polaris community. With a lot of the companies who are are helping put Polaris together, which includes like Snowflake and Dremio. But yeah, no, it was a really good event, and definitely like interest in sort of what Polaris and Iceberg can provide to many of the other projects seem to be of interest. Like basically a lot of these sort of more data oriented projects saying, okay, hey, Iceberg can solve a lot of issues because a lot of times you have to coordinate multiple services, like multiple different database systems and whatnot, and that increases the cost of running a system because those are more compute, individual machines you have to run to get sort of one system going. But if the data can just basically exist in place on a storage system, and compute only has to kind of be done when it's needed, and you can separate that storage from compute and be able to coordinate that a little bit more granularly, that creates some interesting dynamics. So, but yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. My name is Alex Merced. You're listening to Catalog, Manifest, and Metadata. Oh my, have a great day and enjoy.